All right, everyone, good morning. Good morning, yes. Yeah, can I have a response? Good morning. Hello. Thank you so much for being here with us on this gorgeous morning. Yes, Jeff. We're going to hit it in just a minute. Yep, Ashley's on the lights. We've got a fabulous crew here with Jeff and Ashley. Thank you both so much. But really, thank you for sharing this beautiful morning with us. I know there are a lot of things pulling at your attention. I am Karen Brooks McWhorter. I'm the Collier Reed Director of Curatorial Education and Museum Services here at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. And I am proud to welcome you to the fourth convening of the Peter Hassrick Public Programs Series. I include this photo. It's one of my favorites. It also connects thematically with the topic of the day. So this series is coordinated by the Whitney Western Art Museum, and it honors our friend Peter. Peter was one of America's foremost scholars of Western American art history, and surely one of the most engaging speakers on the topic. I know that many of you all share the experience of sitting in the audience when Peter was at the podium, and it doesn't get better than that. It doesn't get better. So far in our series, we've hosted art historians Carol Clark and Byron Price and artist Stephen Hannock. This morning, we have the privilege of hearing from another one of Peter's friends and a dear friend of mine, the renowned artist, Tony Foster. Before we dive into the Green River, as it were, I want to thank the donors to the Peter Hassrick Public Programs Fund. I also want to thank the Whitney Western Art Museum staff and advisory board for their support and stewardship of this program. Special thanks are due to Dr. Ashley Espinal right here and our events team for pulling together today's program and the reception that follows. I'd also like to recognize special guests who made the trip from Cornwall to California and everywhere in between here to convene in Cody to celebrate with us. Tony is here, of course. The staff of and advisors to the Foster Museum are here, and many of Tony's friends. Ashley, if you hit the lights. So today's program complements the special exhibition currently on view in our Anne and Charles Duncan Special Exhibitions Gallery. Watercolour Diaries from the Green River remains on view through October the 22nd, so there's plenty of time to see it and enjoy it. The show was coordinated by Tony and the Foster Museum and us here at the Whitney, and it's been a joy to work closely with Tony and with Kristen Poole, the artistic director of the Foster. We've worked on this project since 2019 when we hosted Tony as an artist in residence. He was here for a week. Tony had just wrapped up a rafting trip on the Green River, and during his time in Cody, we began to discuss the prospect of hosting an exhibition on the Green, a new journey, as it were, to debut here in the state where the mighty river has its source. It's kind of an under-celebrated river, I think, in our state. It is part of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, but we often think north and west when thinking about the GYE, and it's a critical waterway, of course. So 4 years after 2019, and having persevered through a pandemic which impeded transatlantic travel and therefore travel on the water, we're proud to present this exhibition. On display are 16 artworks of various locations on the Green, from its headwaters in Wyoming to its confluence with the Colorado and Utah. So together these artworks form a journey, capital J, and this is a painting project based on a wilderness theme. Also in the exhibition is a 7-minute film, Painting the Green. This film pulls back the curtain on the realities of a plein air painter's work. The film is produced and directed by David Schendel, who's here with us today. David. Joe is also here. He's behind the camera. So my interview for the film, which we'll watch momentarily, took place last fall in the Wind River Mountains with Squaretop, which you see here in the center, one of the most iconic peaks in the Wind River Mountains. This was my backdrop. I'd come on assignment to accompany and observe Tony as he sighted and produced a painting of Green River lakes. Tony may tell you, and I'm just going to preempt this, that I was there just to fish, but I promise you I was on the clock. an art historian in the wild. And in any case, the incredible painting that Tony created represents the source of the Green River in this series of 16 paintings. And it was truly an incomparable, a special experience to see this painting come into being. On our Wind River trip, I'd brought along this. I don't know if you all are familiar with this book, Run, River, Run. And you'll notice that it's only part of the book. So I know it seems sacrilegious, but you all are outdoors people. You know, to cut weight, I'd excised just the first couple chapters, which richly describe the river from its source to the lower Green River Lake, which was the area we'd be visiting. As it turns out, we didn't have to do much hiking, backpacking, because Tony found his site very near to the beginning of our trip. But in any case, I brought along this amazing book. And Anne Zwinger opens this with a quote from Washington Irving, author of the classic Adventures of Captain Bonneville, who wrote about the river in 1859. If you'll indulge me, I want to read just a bit. The Green River, or Colorado of the West, set forth on its wandering pilgrimage to the Gulf of California. At first a mere mountain torrent dashing northward over crag and precipice in a succession of cascades and tumbling into the plain, where, expanding into an ample river, it circled away to the south, and after alternately shining out and disappearing in the mazes of the vast landscape, was finally lost in a horizon of mountains. Zwinger continues with her own poetic description of the source. I just love this. And I included this in my essay in the amazing catalog too. I couldn't not. Beneath the beating of the wind, I can hear the river beginning. Snow rounds into water, seeps and trickles, splashes and pours and clatters, burnishing the shattered gray rock, and carols down slope, light and sound interwoven with sunlight. These were the descriptions of the Wyoming beginning of the green that were in my head as we embarked on this journey with Tony. Watching him sketch, then paint the Green River Lakes in situ with birdsong on the breeze deepened my appreciation for the green's ecological and geological significance, really immeasurably so. And in discussions well before and after our backcountry adventure, I garnered new understanding of the river's cultural significances. The river has human histories which are much longer and deeper rooted than that of Captain Bonneville. As art historian Jim Ballinger has noticed, and Jim is here today with us as well, the green has a complicated history that includes indigenous peoples, Spanish explorers, fur trappers, gold rush migrants, and Mormon settlers. Indigenous peoples, including the Shoshone, have known and stewarded these waters and the ecosystems they nurture for generations. Tony's artwork acknowledges and celebrates these historic and continued connections. And in our exhibition catalog and our film, Lynette St. Clair, who is a Shoshone cultural preservationist, she speaks really eloquently to the subject of generational ties to this land. Without further ado, I'm excited to share with you all the film produced by David Schendel and his talented team called Painting the Green. And Tony will take the stage just after.
Well, it wasn't really difficult. I found it fairly early on. And although I poked around quite a bit afterwards and had a look at other places, this seemed, even though it was the first thing I saw more or less, it seemed like the right thing. It just had all the elements it needs really. It's got an extraordinary backdrop of Squaretop and those other formations there, which are quite interesting. And then It's not just a massive area of lake, which is very difficult to make an interesting painting out of. It's got all these little headlands coming in, which guide your eye really into the formations at the back.
You know, Tony, you might not have noticed this, but your hat looks a heck of a lot like Squaretop.
So we are here to accompany Tony Foster, our friend, the fabulous artist. He and I and the Buffalo Bill Center of the West were interested in celebrating the Green River. The Green is one of the most important watersheds in the West.
We call the Green River the Buhi Okwe, and literally translates to green water or green river. And it's a powerful place. We always say it has boha, which is medicine. And when you look at it or you're around it, you can feel that sense of energy that you can get from that. And just the landscape itself, you know, it's a powerful thing. It's never static, it's always changing. And that's the beauty of it.
The questions are in my mind and the answers are on the paper. That's quite right, because as soon as you put that line down, you know immediately whether it's right or wrong. And if it's wrong, you rub it out, and if it isn't, then you carry on. And so it's every inch is considered. Now, I don't paint like a lot of people. I mean, I love Winslow Homer, for example, who could beautifully describe a landscape in about 10 wonderful deft brushstrokes. I can't do that. I just have to sit and do it for as long as it takes to get it right. It doesn't have to be accurate. It's not about accuracy. It's much more about truth. It's more about my truth and trying to convey my response to this place. It's not about how many trees there are down there on that little sandbank. I don't care how many there are, really, so long as I get the impression of those trees as I see them. That's the important thing. And somebody will come along and say, oh, you've missed out 3 trees. Okay.
I do think that the experience of Tony's painting inspires much more than just an appreciation of place. It causes you to slow down, to spend time in those particular places.
I'm not trying to simply put a frame around a particularly choice piece of landscape and copy it. I'm trying to evoke what it actually feels like to live there for a while.
Well, Constable, one of the most revered landscape painters ever, said a landscape painting is a view seen through a perception. And that's what I love about it, in that whatever view I find, it's my perception of it that people are going to see when the painting's finished. And the marvelous thing I always think is if you had 2 artists sitting side by side painting exactly the same thing, their paintings would be entirely different.
I don't think most people appreciate how challenging it is to paint in watercolor. The fact that you get one go at the whites, for instance. He's not painting from a photograph that someone else took of a wild place. He's taken the effort, he has put in the sweat equity to get to the most beautiful places in the world, to paint them.
My personal motivation for supporting Tony Foster's work is, as an educator, to be able to give our students the opportunity to see these arts, and what better way to do it than through nature. I think we share that relationship in terms of feeling the landscape in everything that you do. Wilderness should be important to all of us, because what we do to the earth, we do to ourselves.
People should care about Tony Foster's paintings because he cares about including us all in a conversation about art and wilderness and the beautiful possibilities when those two things are married. Tony is doing us all a service by exploring, by adventuring in these places where most of us will never be able to trek. And he's inspiring our compassion. He keeps us in tune with what is good, what is possible. In a way, he helps connect us all on an even playing field and implicates us all in joint ownership, really, of the world.
If I ever did a perfect painting, maybe I could stop. That would be quite nice, really. I could retire. But until I do that perfect painting, I can't retire.
Usudam buhi ogwe divisi zan navoin. Usudam ba damanakand. The Green River is a beautiful place, and water is life.
Wow, David, it was amazing to see it at that scale. Thank you so much. Again, yeah, kudos to David, to Joe. Wow. All right, and now it's time to hear from our special guest, Tony Foster.
I hope this is still working. Is this still working? Yeah. Fell out of my pocket. Well, so wearing the same hat, but a new shirt and braces, I hope you noticed, in honor of this occasion. Also honored, of course, to be considered a friend of Peter Hassrick. I hadn't realized just how much Peter had endorsed what I've been doing for many years. And I would just like to say how wonderful it is to be part of this program. Thank you. Also, thanks to Karen, who I thought forgot to mention that this whole project really was cooked up by her. She, after I'd been artist in residence here for a week, she took me for a drink in a delightful garden in a little hotel, fed me gin and tonics until I finally thought, what a good idea it would be to come back. Also slightly unnerving to see that most of the audience here have heard my talks before. So it strikes me that somebody's going to spring up and say, last time I heard you talk, you said that mountain was 16,000 feet high, and now you say it's 18,000. But anyway, I stand to be corrected. I'm sure I shall be corrected many times by my pals in the audience. It's a great pleasure to see so many friends here. There's several distinct groups, really, but all are good friends. There are the river rats who took part in the journey itself and suffered, along with me, the indignities of deep mud and cold winds, rainstorms, freezing cold temperatures, baking hot temperatures, and all the things you get if you have the temerity to go into the backcountry. So the river rats are here in force, as are what I call my posse from Ketchum, friends, Ketchum, Idaho, friends who are mostly mountain men and fanatics of the outdoors and have traveled with me to many of the wildest places in the world, and without whom many of my paintings could never have been done. And of course, I'd like to thank the staff of the Foster Museum, who have also attended in force, and thank Jane Woodward, who is the sort of eminence grise and the firepower behind the Foster Museum in Palo Alto, California. If you happen to be in Northern California, then do visit. It's open every day, and beautifully houses an enormous collection of my work, including, I think, 3 complete journeys, exhibitions on particular themes. And also, I would like to thank the staff of Cody here, who have, particularly Karen, of course, who have shepherded with the Foster Museum this exhibition through its process, and have helped to organise for it to tour on to 4 other museums in this country. So all in all, I've got a lot of thanking to do, and I realise, looking into the audience here, they do say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes the whole auditorium of people to get together an exhibition, I reckon. So thank you all. Where am I? Oh yes, so what am I going to do now? I'm going to show 40 images of, the first set of images will be of the work on the Green River, the paintings on the Green River, and say something about how they were done, when they were made, and why, and also about why the exhibition came into being in the first place. And secondly, I'm going to put that exhibition in the context of the work I've been doing for the last 40 years. But before that, I've got to say, in my late 70s, I've discovered that I do tend occasionally to have to hunt for the names of places and people, and even the word in the middle of a sentence. And if you happen to know the word that I'm hunting for, then shout it out. Okay? That way, we'll all get to the refreshments a darn sight earlier. And the second thing I want to talk about, although I don't need to talk about it much because it's shown perfectly well in the film, the second thing I want to talk about is my painting process. For 40 years, I've been traveling to the world's great wildernesses to paint. And the idea of a wilderness, not particularly European concept, really, because all of Europe has been trampled over, bought, sold, and owned by different people for hundreds or thousands of years. And so my idea of wilderness only occurred really when I first came to work in America, in your wonderful national parks. Although they're not wildernesses, really, they do have wilderness areas within them, and they certainly have the sense of places which have had no interference from human beings. And that, to me, was a revelation and an inspiration. And I think your national parks are some of your greatest achievements, and I hope you'll do all you can to protect them from whatever threats they face. So working in wilderness implies, of course, that you can't drive there, there's no way to get there except on foot or by canoe or raft or any other kind of rather slow method of arriving at a wilderness place in order to make a painting. And I travel on foot, by canoe, by raft, in order to get to the heart of a wild place, so I can make a painting where the appearance, at least, of the place is that it's completely untouched and natural. Then, of course, that also implies, as there aren't any motels, that I should camp. I've camped in that tadpole tent that you've seen there. I've worked out that if I've been doing this for 40 years, I must have camped in that blasted tent for about 8 or 10 years. Imagine living in a tadpole tent for 8 or 10 years. I mean, it's an absurd concept, isn't it? And I'll tell you what, the novelty has worn off. The novelty of, when I crawled out of that, actually that little snap you saw of me kind of pushing the flap aside, David kindly cut it at that point because I crawled out of there like an arthritic alligator. And I can remember stretching like this, and Joe with his camera pointed at me, and I thought, oh no, I'm going to look such a complete idiot. And talk about an old man in the wrong place. Anyway, I said, I'll tell you what, Joe, I'll pay anything you like for you to wipe that. And he said, no, the director told me to get it. So it's all there in storage somewhere. It'll be blackmail me for years to come, no doubt. And so, yeah, I believe I've camped in that blasted tent for 10 years, and that's long enough. All the paintings, as you saw, were resolved on site. In other words, I don't work from photographs. I don't work from sketches. I actually, if I'm doing a big painting, then it's the big painting, the whole thing that's been done on site. If it's a small painting, same thing. They're not finished on site. I can't pretend that. They're resolved on site, which means that when I get them back to my studio in Cornwall, then I finish them from memory. I don't use photographs. I finish them from memory and from notes that I make on the painting itself. And I find that if you've stared at something from morning till night for several days, it might be 10 days. For a big painting, it might be 12, 15 days. For the biggest painting I've ever done, it was 23 days. If you've done that, you know the place pretty well, and you can call it back from your memory about what it was that inspired you about the place and what it looked like. And I don't need photographs. And in fact, I found when I did used to take snapshots, they were completely hopeless. And so I rely on sitting in place and working. So now I think we should move on to the slides, provided I can work this okay. Okay, yes, now this is interesting. At least I think it is. It's interesting to me anyway. This exhibition didn't actually start life as an exhibition about the Green River. It started life as a contribution towards an exhibition I'm doing, and I've been working on since 2007, called Exploring Time. And I thought what a good idea it would be to go down to the Green River and get some of these fossils for myself to put in this paintings for the exhibition. I had always, for many years, bought these little fossilized fish from rock shops. You could get them in pretty well any rock shop, and they're marvelous things. And I always used to give, because they're 50 million years old, I always used to give them to my friends on their 50th birthdays, and they, of course, would be saying, "Oh, I'm 50, you know, my life's over. I'm late middle age now. I can't pretend I'm young anymore." And I'd give them this thing, and I'd say, "This is 50 million years old. Just get yourself in perspective." And so I was always fascinated by them and loved them. And then when I started to do an exhibition about time, I thought, I'll go down to the Green River, I'll do a painting of it, and I'll find some of these fossils and put them together. So I went to Warfield Quarry, which is in Wyoming, and you go about, I don't know, 10, 12 miles down a dirt track in the backcountry, and you come to the quarry. There's a man there in a tin shed who, if you give him $30, he'll give you a hard hat, goggles, gloves, chisel and a hammer, and you can just go and bash at the rocks until you find all the fossils you want. And I must say, it's a delightful occupation. Some rocks you open, there's nothing. Some rocks you open, and there's only a bit of a fish. Some rocks you open, and you've got a whole fish. And it's a bit like fishing in that it's very hit and miss, I think. But I think much nicer than fishing, really. You're not doing any harm. And so the nice thing about that was that the man in the tin hut, who was pretty used to people coming to find fossils and not particularly interested in it, he could see, because I had the film crew with me, he could see that this was something slightly out of the ordinary. So he came out of his hut after I'd been there a while and said, "How are you getting on?" And I said, "Oh, pretty well. You know, I found this one and this one, nice little fish." And he said, "Oh, I think we could do better than that." So he went into his little hut, and he came out with a great big wrecker bar, and he shoved this wrecker bar in a crack in the rock and started to leave it open, and this pillar of rock began to sway, and finally, with a crash, it came thumping down onto the ground, and he walked along it, and he pointed out, he said, "Here, split it just there." So I split it just there, and I got a complete shoal of fish. It was just absolutely extraordinary. And so I can recommend, if you've got children particularly who absolutely adore it, of course, or grandchildren, or I don't know, find somebody else's kids if you haven't got any of your own. But anyway, but do take a trip out there, see this nice man in his shed, give him $30 and go and find some fish for yourselves. Anyway, so sorry, that's a long introduction. So this was part of a different show, really. And Chris Mazzola and I, our great friend Chris Mazzola, went down to, this is me actually on my way up to paint this painting of Steamboat Rock. This was a place I'd already identified as being a likely place to make a painting. And I'd seen photographs of it, and I thought it was a pretty extraordinary object in the middle of this fantastic oxbow where the Yampa River meets the Green. And so we camped down more or less on the beach, and every day I would hike up about 400 feet up the cliff, walk across this mesa, which had no sense that anybody had ever walked across it before, and found this spot here and sat and painted, I think, for about 6 days. And that, of course, is this painting here, and you can see a couple of the fish that I found to go with it. And I thought that was probably the end of the story as far as the Green River is concerned. But then Chris, who was sitting next to me one day, up on the top there, said, hey, this would make quite an interesting raft journey, don't you think? And I said, yeah, I suppose it would. And he said, well, would you like me to organise it? So I said, oh, sure, if you want to. So therefore, Chris and I, plus about another 19 people, it turned out to be an extraordinary production in the end. Really rather too big for my taste, but anyhow, about another 19 people joined us, and we did a 5-day journey from where did we go from, guys? Gates of Lodore. Thank you. From the Gates of Lodore to Split Rock, so here we are on that journey. Now, David came with the film crew on that journey. As you can see, there's David bossing people about. Matt Lydecker, who's a friend of long standing from Ketchum, a professional boatman. And who was that on the camera? Sam, was it? Sorry? Sam Crossley on camera. And so they of course, had many technical difficulties in keeping the cameras charged and all those other things with solar power. But anyway, they managed to get some pretty good footage, as you saw in that lovely film, very lyrical film, I think, which David made, has put together from that journey. And this is the first of that little set of 4 paintings. This was the Gates of Lodore looking downriver. And there again, all of this particular series, we've got those little fossilized fish as the souvenir. And I still wasn't thinking of this as being an exhibition about the Green River until I came to Cody with these little paintings and was artist in residence and talked to the people, the visitors who came and so on. Karen and I got on very well. I thought everybody in Wyoming seemed very friendly. And so the idea of turning this into a specific exhibition about the Green River took root. I then went back home and COVID struck. And during COVID, we were under strict lockdown in the UK. We had 3 lockdowns altogether in 1 year. It turned out to be 156 days under lockdown, which meant that you were only allowed to leave home for an hour a day. No matter what, you had no excuse, you were arrested, or theoretically, if anybody found you, you were arrested. Luckily, mostly I didn't get found because I used to walk into the backcountry. But anyhow, one day I was poking through, sort of incarcerated at home, I was poking through my plan chest, looking for paintings to finish that I hadn't finished for one reason or another. And I found this painting, which was it's about 3/4 done, but unfinished. And I took it out and thought, that's not bad, actually. I think I could make something of that. So I put it on the easel, finished it from memory, and that's a painting from 1990. And as I was painting it, I was thinking to myself, I'm sure this was something to do with the Green River. And so I looked into my diaries for 1990, and I found it. And sure enough, it was a 5-day journey, which my great friend Bill Brace and I did down to the Green River and back. It was a circular walk through the desert. Bill Brace, I should explain, was someone with whom I've traveled for many, many months. A great friend, a huge influence on my life, and a man who it was just brilliant to be in the backcountry with. He was the chairman of the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences at MIT, a world-renowned scientist, and just a marvelous person to travel. He would always explain the landscape to me in the most wonderful terms, and I think had an influence not only on the fact I stayed alive, but also on the fact that my paintings are sort of geologically quite accurate, I think, because he would explain it to me so wonderfully well. Anyway, for some reason, I can't remember the reason, but we chose to go down to the Green River, and so I finished that little painting, and I thought, I'll look in on my diary. It said that we walked down to the Green River, got caught in a sandstorm, all sorts of horrible things happened, and we finally ended up at the Green River. And I didn't like the Green River much. I thought it looked a bit muddy and not very interesting. But anyway, I sat there rather disgruntled and did this little painting. And I looked in my sketchbook for 1990, and there it was. So I thought, well, that's fantastic. not only have I managed to produce 2 paintings for the Green River while I'm under lockdown in England, but also my dear friend Bill Brace is actually still part of the exhibition after all these years. Karen, yes, now she came into the scene at that point really, or at least she decided that she wanted to come too on one of the expeditions, and so she came up into the, as she's explained, she came up into the Wind River range with us, and was a fabulous camping companion. We had wonderful discussions in the evenings by the campfire, but the marvelous thing about Karen, I thought, or the most extraordinary thing about her that I noticed, was that she emerged after 4 or 5 days camping. She emerged just as looking as clean and crisp and untouched as she entered. I couldn't believe it. She entered looking completely clean, well pressed and smart, and she left in the same manner. I've never met anybody like it. We always end up looking complete scruffs at the end of a trip. She didn't. She walked out looking just as beautiful as she started. And here I am, of course, sitting painting that wonderful landscape. We did scout our way all the way up to the top lake to see if that was any better, and certainly that seemed like that would, from all of us looking at the map and so on, it seemed to me that would have made a better view from the top lake. But when we considered it, we realized that would have been a painting of Squaretop. It wouldn't have been a painting of the lake. And I thought, no, this is about the river. It's not about Squaretop in particular, though Squaretop is a wonderful touchstone in this painting. But with this, what's wonderful about this is that your eye follows the lake around and finally ends up on Squaretop. But nonetheless, the painting isn't about that. The painting is about there's me working on it. The painting is about the fact that on the left-hand side, the lake actually turns into a river. And that's the point. I believe that's where the river starts. Okay, the water's collecting together, but up until that point, it's not a river. It's a river when it starts just past that rock there, I reckon. I'm no geologist, but that's my thought. The necklace there, of course, is from my point of view, the souvenirs that I include in my paintings, there's usually a point to them. And the point in this case was that the Shoshone used to obviously use this land for their summer camps. I imagine if I were a Shoshone, certainly I would, because it's absolutely beautiful. The weather is very temperate. The lake is full of fish. There must have been loads and loads of animals around for them to hunt. There were all sorts of things growing that they could collect to keep them going through the winter, because winters in Wyoming must be the harshest things you could possibly go through, I would imagine. And so this necklace was made by Chastity Teton, Shoshone Bannock, and there are 2 things about it I like. First of all, it's a very clear reminder that this used to be Shoshone land, and secondly, it reflects beautifully the colours of the foreground here, and also the colours of those little leaves there, which I painted when I was sitting in my tent one day when it was raining. I just walked back in the rain, collected those leaves, sat in my tent and painted them for want of something better to do. Now here we are. The order of these is not the same as the order in the exhibition. The order in the exhibition is from beginning to end kind of thing. The way I'm showing them to you is the order in which I did them. So to me that makes sort of more sense. Here I am sitting working in Canyonlands in ferocious heat sometimes. I guess the ground temperature was somewhere in the 90s a lot of the time. So I was sitting there half the time feeling fairly sorry for myself and painting this painting. And in a way that's the kind of painting which I'm more used to doing, as I've painted the Grand Canyon many, many times. And so I think I knew pretty well how that should work. But it was extraordinarily complex, all these different mesas sticking out into the river, and it's very, very difficult when you're sitting there to figure out whereabouts the river actually comes from and where it's going to, which of those mesas it's going behind, and so on. But you can see there's a thing on the right-hand side there of the river called Turk's Head, and the river runs around a big bend there, and then eventually, of course, after about another 50 miles, ends up in the Colorado. That obviously a nice view, sort of rather classically framed by a big lump of rock on one side and an ancient tree on the left-hand side. The souvenir there, or the object underneath it, is actually 4 different kinds of sand that make up this landscape. The one on the left is the sand, is the rock ground down that I'm sitting in. The next one down is that white layer that you can see, what they call the white rim. People go 4-wheel driving around there. The white rim. The one below it is the red sandstone beneath the white rim, and the bottom one is the sand which is in the river. I hope I won't be arrested for bringing that home. But actually that stuff is given to me by geologists, so I guess I'm in good shape, because geologists give me a bunch of stones and I grind it up myself. Now, what are we doing next? Oh yes, canoeing. In the front is Rachel Burton, who was in the front of my canoe most of the time. Very resourceful young woman, worked on the film crew, but also very steady on a paddle. And I'm not quite sure where this was taken, but it's pretty a beautiful piece of rock face. And the nice thing about this trip, that we did the last 100 miles, more or less, from Ruby Ranch down to the Colorado. The nice thing about it is that you get deeper and deeper into canyon landscape. So you feel that you're kind of entering the world. And in fact, you are. A geologist has pointed out that for every mile you go, you are going 1 million years deeper into the earth, which is a wonderful, wonderful thought, actually. A very moving idea. You can see the canoe loaded down. You saw in the film that we were suffering incredibly with the mud. The river was very, very, very low because of all the droughts that have been in the southwest for the last 4 years, I think, until this year. So the river was incredibly low, which meant that we were always wading knee-deep through mud. And in one case, poor old Robin here was actually crutch-deep in the mud, and we thought we were going to lose him, or we weren't quite sure how the heck he was going to get out. But anyway, luckily he did, and he's here in the audience. But it was a pretty grim trip, really, if you were to think about it. Certainly if you were to put your name down for it and pay a large sum of money, you'd be pretty disgruntled because you would have a miserable time. But luckily, I was with such an upbeat bunch of people. The only person complaining was me. And the rest of them seemed perfectly cheerful, very well organised, very resourceful, tough as anything, and always having a good time. So in the end, it became, although one of the worst trips we could possibly have taken, it ended up to be one of the best. It was 8 days. Was it 8 days or 10? I can't remember. Do you know? 10, was it? Okay, 10 days. This was the first camp, and I was a bit stuck for something to paint, to be perfectly honest. But anyway, I sort of thrashed about in the bush and came upon this extraordinary rock, which looks almost like a totem pole, doesn't it? But in fact, it's a rock. I can't imagine, if I'd had Bill Brace with me, he would have told me how it could possibly be standing there like that, in this sort of wonderful amphitheatre of cliffs all around it. Why is that one just standing there with everything else has fallen down? But anyhow, it made a wonderful sort of little subject, a little rock study, really. And also we saw there, we thought, cougar tracks. So for this little series of work, I do a little rock drawing every day. And in this case, it was cougar tracks, which we saw in the sand, or in the mud. And also, there's a test tube of mud sealed up to remind everybody, including myself, just what was the predominant nature of this journey. I always think that rock drawings are there for a purpose, really. I guess it's partly aesthetic, but also it's telling a story. And in this case, I thought I should tell a story with my rock drawings. So the X indicates that it was 1 day from the start to this point, and the number of dots is the number of miles we did each day. this, can't remember what this is called. Oh, Stillwater Canyon, this one's called. This is about day 6, I think, or day 5 of the journey. We were sitting on a wonderful sandbar. Up until this point, we'd had to somehow go through the mud and hoist all our stuff up about 10 feet onto the river bank proper, where the rocks are, and shovel that heavy, heavy stuff that you carry in a canoe 10 feet above us before we could even make camp. Luckily for me, all the other people in the party, mostly the women from Seattle, I got to say, said, don't you carry that stuff, Tony, we'll carry it. So, okay, fine. I'm perfectly happy to behave the old granddad when necessary. But anyway, we found a lovely sandbar, which I think was one of the nicest camps we had on that entire trip. Here we are, you can see, this is, I think, loading the boats, but loading the boats sometimes took an hour and a half because they were so much lower than where we were camping, and then we had to slip and slide through mud with all this heavy stuff and pass it from one place to another place to another place to another place until we'd loaded each boat one by one. And it was testing and dirty work. But anyway, as I say, nobody complained. This is the last painting of that particular series. I think there are 6 paintings. I felt I fell short, really, because I always like to do one painting a day when I'm on a river journey. And in this case, it was 8 or 9 days, or 10, somebody just said, and I only did 6 paintings, simply because the amount of time it took to go down this sluggish river, much longer than normal, and then the amount of time we spent loading and unloading and setting up the camp and taking it down again and so on. But anyway, you get what you get with these things. And this is the confluence, this is the Colorado now, and we're at a place called Spanish Bottom. And we stopped just at the point where this huge notice says, "Do not go further, you will die." So you see, I make it sound like hardship, but it's not all hardship. There are times when the company is just extraordinary and everybody stays cheerful, and we just had a great time, really. So this is a change of pace now. This is to set this exhibition here into the context of some of the work I've been doing for the last 40 years. This is, I'm the only person in the world who's ever painted all 3 faces of Everest. If you look down on Everest from above, you'll see it's triangular. So it has a north face, an east face, both of which are in Tibet, and a southwest face, which is in Nepal. And so this is, we went up to the east face in order that I could paint it, and we were stuck in our tents for 3 days in a blizzard, and so I read my book. I lay in my sleeping bag for a day, lay in my sleeping bag for another day, reading another book. Got completely fed up. Opened the tent flap and just painted what I could see out of it, which was this completely unnamed rock face. I don't know what it is. It's not got a cord or anything. It's a piece of rock and snow, and that's it. That's what I saw. And the funny thing is, the most miserable painting of the entire trip turned out to be the one that everybody wanted to buy. Isn't that funny? Here I am painting the north face of Everest with my Sirdar, Ang Puri, who was a temple painter when he wasn't actually accompanying treks and hikes and climbs, and he wouldn't leave my side. And so in the end I gave him a sketchbook and a paint box and said, do some of your paint, you do your painting, I'll do my painting. And he sat next to me about 5 yards away and painted a beautiful painting of the Buddha, very, very formal painting of the Buddha, while I sat and painted the landscape. That's the painting, one of the paintings I did. This is the southwest face from above Gokyo. That's done at 16,700 feet, I think, 16,760 or something like that. Anybody going to argue? Okay, we'll stick at that then. This painting nearly killed me because I ended up with acute mountain sickness and was, as I later discovered, they thought the doctor, because I said, I walked down to a porter's rescue clinic at 14,000 feet and was put into what they call a gamau bag, where and then a Sherpa pumped it up with a foot pump until it was as if I was down at 8,000 feet. And then they put in oxygen and hydrocortisone, I think, and I don't know, can't remember what else. But anyway, and when I emerged, I said, well, the funny thing is, I thought if I had just had one good night's sleep, I'd have been all right. And the doctor said, one good night's sleep and you'd have been dead. So anyway, so this painting, in fact, was, I have great affection for it because it's probably the hardest painting I've ever done. It's 6 foot long and done on site. This is the east face, which is very seldom been seen by anybody. It's only been climbed by very, very few people. And I did an exhibition called Exploring Beauty, and I asked all sorts of people I called my luminaries. I asked them, what is the most beautiful place you've ever seen? And in this case, I asked Britain's foremost climber at the time, Stephen Venables, and he said that the east face of Everest, which he climbed without oxygen, the only person who's ever done that, but the view of the east face from after the Cholar Pass, looking down Cholar, was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. And that's the painting I did, which was part of that exhibition. It was also, actually, it formed two things, because it's part of an exhibition too called Searching for a Bigger Subject, which compared Everest and the Grand Canyon, the world's two greatest landscape icons. And so I thought I ought to at least, so I went to Everest 3 times to work, and then I went to Canyon many times to work. And that exhibition was one of my best, I think. Here we are, having just come down from the east face, cheering the fact that we've all survived. None of the yaks died, none of the yak drivers died, none of the porters, nobody died, and we're all relieved to have got down to what you might call more temperate landscape. This is me at work on the Grand Canyon side of that exhibition. This is painting from Point Sublime, and as you can see, I built an easel that time because it was a big painting, 6-foot painting. I hadn't got a 6-foot drawing book. I hadn't got a 6-foot anything that would hold up against the wind, and I couldn't hammer my pegs into the rock. So I built an easel out of sawn up bits of timber. It was a strong thing. It was like a 5-bar gate propped up, very, very heavy, so it would stand up against the wind. And some Swedish hikers came to Point Sublime, and I was sitting back from it a bit and having a tea break. And they came back and they said, "Excuse me, have you told the warders about this?" So I said, "About what?" And they said, "That thing down on the point." So I said, "What?" And they said, "That thing there, that shelter that some hippies have built." I said, "Oh, it's not a shelter for hippies." I said, it's an easel that's been put up by the Park Service in case anybody wants to come here and paint a painting." That's the painting I was doing, and that's a scorcher, and that was purchased by Phoenix Art Museum and put into their collection. And the glass tube there contains all the rocks, all the rock levels, all the rock layers from the Grand Canyon, from the Kaibab limestone at the top on the left-hand side down to the Zoroaster granite right at the bottom. And then the leaves were from the aspen trees that I was sitting with when I was doing that painting. And they go from green to red because, of course, that's the way leaves turn. This is from the first Colorado rafting trip done with my pals from Ketchum, Idaho. And it was a 16-day self-guided trip, which was just a wonderful, wonderful trip. And luckily, my friends are very, very skillful river rats, and so they guided the rafts with great skill through all the big rapids. 16 days is a wonderful length of time to spend on the Colorado. I've done the Colorado 3 times. Each time I painted it one painting a day, This is 2 from a set of 16. The map on the medal on the left-hand side is because by mistake I was on a rubber ducky trundling along behind the rafts on a nice level piece of water, and suddenly we hit a big rapid. I can't remember which one it was now. Anybody remember? I think it was a class 6 rapid, and I didn't know what to do. I'm no rapid runner, and all I could think to do was just keep paddling as fast as you can go. In other words, try and keep ahead of things so that you could stay straight. And sure enough, I bobbed up after having been drowned several times. I managed to bob up to the surface, still sitting in my raft, on my rubber duck rather, while everybody else had already gone through, and they were standing looking anxiously from the bank, thinking, oh my God, we've drowned him. But anyway, I bobbed up in my rubber duck and landed, and everybody was completely relieved, including me. And in the evening, they presented me with that medal, which I'm very... They said I'm the only person they knew who'd ever gone through a class 6 rapid on a rubber duck. So I was very proud of that. This set of 16 paintings was purchased by Denver Art Museum. And that was from the first Colorado trip. I've made 3 trips. The second 2 have been with Hatch expeditions, and each 8 days, but I did a painting every day on those 2. I've got a list here of all the rivers I've done. I don't want to give you the impression that all I do is rivers. It's not, but rivers are a wonderful metaphor for a journey. They start off tentative and small, and then they go through full force, and then finally they emerge in the sea, kind of flat and probably usually not very interesting. A bit like me, really. I'm the same. I started off full of force, and I'm now getting a little flat. But anyway, the rivers I've done so far, I think, I've done the Colorado 3 times. I've done the Middle Fork of the Salmon. I've done the whole Salmon with my friends, which was 29 days rafting. No, first of all, were we kayaking to start with? Yeah, we were. And then we started rafting in sport boats, and then we got onto oar boats. We started with 4 people, and we finished with 13 people, because people joined us as we went along, and it got bigger and bigger, the trip. But it was just the wonderful, magical trip to do 29 days, completely divorced from civilization and just doing nothing but concentrate on the river. And that, I did 29 paintings for that exhibition. And we looked it up the other day, and apparently it was 415 miles, which is really a great distance to go on a river. But it was, I think all of us who went on it thought of it as one of our best trips. And Bill and Annie Vanderbilt were the quartermasters for the trip, and spent weeks figuring out just how much food you need for 4 people, then 6 people, then 12 people, then 13 people, for 3 days, 5 days, 8 days, 29 days. And it was masterly done. And my friends, luckily, are all skilled. Then after Lewis and Clark, I did an exhibition which involved quite a few river journeys. I can't remember them all, to be honest, but I could if I looked it up. Probably 4 or 5 river journeys involved in retracing the journey of Lewis and Clark, not the whole of the Missouri, thank God, but from the part of the river which had before them never seen a white person, to the part of the Snake, or was it the Columbia? The Snake, I think, the Columbia, which had never the upper part of the Columbia, which had never seen a white person. A lot of the other stuff had been trapped. French trappers had been to one side, and British, I imagine, American trappers had been the other side, quite a long way up both ways. So I just did the middle bit, which no white man had ever been in before Lewis and Clark. But anyway, that still involved quite a few river journeys. And then the final one, which was an extraordinary adventure, which was the Rio Platano in Honduras, which was through untouched rainforest, and I think 14 days from where the river emerged out of the mountain down to the Caribbean. And we went through untouched rainforest, which was full of macaws and spider monkeys and enormous iguanas and boa constrictors, and also the wonderful things that you find in rainforests, completely untouched as far as we could see. But now, unfortunately, although it's meant to be a World Heritage Site, completely destroyed and impossible for anybody to enter without the army. because it's been taken over by drug runners and all sorts of nefarious characters, and too dangerous to enter, which is a tragedy. It's been logged, although it's supposed to be protected. It's undoubtedly been hunted and probably destroyed. And that's in, how long ago was that? 15 years, 18 years ago? Anyway, that's a lesson in how not to look after the planet. So I would just say that I think is that the last picture? No, it can't be, can it? There must be more. Oh yeah, there's another one. This is the biggest painting I've ever done in my life. This is 8 feet by 4, picture of the Grand Canyon, which is in an exhibition called Exploring Beauty at the Foster Museum. And it's one of which I'm most proud, really, because it took me 23 days to do it, sitting there day after day. There were times when I thought it was going to drive me completely insane. But it turned out to be, I don't like to be immodest, but I think it is one of my masterworks. And people stand in front of it in awe, and so they should. And there it is. And after I'd finished the painting, I went to the Grand Canyon Museum store and sat. They made a little space for me, gave me a lamp, and gave me the pick of the objects in their store, and I did all these little studies. I mean, that's kind of 7 feet of studies. That took ages, and so there we have it. And there, an arrow. And the souvenir itself is a little arrowhead, not I had found by me, but bought from a Navajo arrowhead maker called Homer Etherton, a very, very fine arrowhead maker. Oh, yeah, there's plenty more to come. Yeah. Sorry, how are we doing? We're late already. I'll be quick. This is from Borneo. This is part of the Exploring Beauty exhibition too. An explorer called Robin Hanbury Tennyson suggested I should go and paint the deer cave. He was the first white person ever to find the deer cave in Borneo, which is an enormous cave, 3 times as high as St. Paul's Cathedral. And I'm looking out at these extraordinary limestone shapes, sort of hills or little mountains really, covered in vegetation. And I'm sitting in this horrible stinky cave, which is the home of 3 million wrinkle-lipped bats. And so if you can imagine, they catch apparently 20 tons of insects a night. If you can imagine, what does 20 tons of insects look like? I mean, would it be this auditorium full of insects? It probably would. I mean, it's inconceivable. But the worst part about it is, of course, they crap 10 tons of guano every night. The stink in there is just unbearable. But anyway, I bore it for as long as it took to do the painting. That's really what the ex-director of Kew Gardens, Sir Ian Prance, who is also a friend. Sorry, I forgot my friends' names too. He suggested Borneo too, so I was able to do those two at the same time. And he suggested it because these buttress trees are the highest in the world. There I'm working underwater. David Attenborough I asked him, and he suggested that the coral reefs were the most beautiful things he'd ever seen. And so I devised a way of working underwater, making sketches at about 30 or 40 feet, put on an extra weight belt so that you can sit solidly on the bottom without being washed around too much, take down a plastic drawing board and plastic drafting film, Caran d'Ache crayons, and just sit on the bottom and draw what you see. Easy enough. That's the painting. The drawing is the thing underneath. And I've got tons of those drawings. I've got whole rolls of them. So from those drawings, I then make the painting that you see. This one was done in Little Cayman. Now, we're getting close to the end. You're lucky. This is all journeys, of course, start and finish at home. In my beautiful home in Cornwall, my village of Tywardreath. And this, actually, I'm doing something about rewilding. I think it's not going to be in the show, but this is rewilding. This is the Luxillian Valley, which used to be heavily mined for tin, copper, Then granite, all sorts of different granites. There's a special granite from there called Luxilionite, which is a beautiful red granite. And so the samples along the bottom are all the things that have been extracted from that valley. But 100 years later, look what it's turned into. The most beautiful bluebells, fantastic trees, wonderful granite rocks, and just a delight to be there. Oh, and here we are. This is the place it's most delightful to be. The New Inn, right opposite my house, just right across the road from my house. Here we are with Eileen and Anne from the Foster Museum, who had come on a visit. Funny how attractive it is for people to make work visits to Foster. But anyhow, and my wife Anne, of course, who is also an artist, who wasn't able to come, unfortunately, because she's too busy working on something that she has to get done. But she also is a good friend of many people in this room. So we end at home, where we should end. Happy, just had a pint by the look of it, and that's the last slide. So, the other thing I meant to do, of course, those of you who don't know about it, oh God, where is it? I can take that out. Can you still hear me? I've moved this out. I just wanted to show you my paint box. Many people in this room are backcountry people. They go traveling. You have a backpack. You resent every ounce you're carrying. Well, imagine everything you carry, plus a drawing board, an aluminium tube, paper, a palette, brushes, pencils, and paints on top of everything that you're carrying. Imagine it. It's just insufferable. I do everything I can to cut down on weight. I cut the handle off my cup. I cut the handle off my toothbrush. I take all those little tabs off my tea bags. I do anything to save a quarter of an ounce. And this is my paint box. All the paintings I have ever done in my life, the last 40 years, big or small, makes no difference, in the studio or in the field, are from this paint box. It always makes me laugh, or I don't laugh in their faces, but I always smile when novice watercolorists show me their paint box, which is the size of a piano keyboard. And I don't actually say, look, this is all you need, but I don't want to undermine their confidence, but nonetheless, it is all you need, really. All you need is that, and the Tupperware lid, and some decent brushes, and some good paper, and just sit and concentrate. That's all there is to it.
Tony, if you're up for it, in the interest of time, we'll take 2 questions here, and then we'll continue conversations up in the garden together. We're going to be in the Braun Garden, which is to the north side of the Plains Indian Museum breezeway. So you're heading toward the Plains Indian Museum, take a right. We've got refreshments there, and we can all continue chatting. But are there a couple questions? I'm going to reiterate them for the sake of our recording. Someone have a question? Yeah.
In the film, you mentioned Winslow, Homer, and Constable. Curious, were you also influenced a little by J.M.W. Turner, although he primarily did seascapes?
The question is about a possible influence from J.M.W. Turner.
One of the great masters, of course, not only of watercolor, but of the effects of weather. Just a marvelous, marvelous painter. And you're right, I mean, he is the master of all those things. Influence, I guess, to an extent. I mean, he apparently was reputed to have had himself lashed to the mast of a boat in a storm in order that he could capture that on paper. I haven't gone that far myself yet, but on the other hand, I have taken some risks. And one wonderful thing about I discovered was my wife actually, Anne, paid for me for my birthday. She and I went to some lectures on Turner by one of the great experts in London. And I found that I used exactly the same techniques that Turner uses. So I was very gratified to find that, but that was just happenstance, really. I hadn't tried to do it. So I guess subconsciously, perhaps, the influence, but I certainly would never try to copy that master.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes. If you combine all the miles you traveled, how many miles do you think you've traveled?
Whoa. Well, I mean, if we don't count air miles, which of course we should these days, gosh, I can't even begin to think. It must be many, many, many thousand. I guess the longest journey, I've done the John Muir Trail, which was 315 miles as a hike. I've done about 400 miles in the Grand Canyon, I think. If you multiply that by 40 years, it must be a lot. My maths isn't good enough to do that. I'm sorry. Just before we close, I've noticed I shouldn't have forgotten to say this because it's the most important thing in the entire purpose of my work. I want to make a quote. I did this from memory, so it's probably not exactly accurate, but from that great wilderness man, John Muir. Civilization is best measured not by the acres under lawns and driveways, but by the areas of wild beauty we are prepared to leave alone. That's the great man, John Muir. And for myself, this is from me, we cannot continue to use the world as if ours is the only generation that needs it. Thank you.